The apartment. After a year of hearing stories and reports about one of our apartments being haunted, I finally get to see it for myself this weekend. I work at an apartment complex, and for a year, one of the residents has been complaining that his apartment is haunted. At first, my boss didn't really take it serious, but lately, I guess it's gone worse, and they finally let him switch units. The other day, he brought his daughter in the office and showed my boss all these scratches that were apparently a result of the haunting. His son came into the office, crying because ghosts have been trying to strangle him. I didn't see the video, but the dad showed my boss a video of stuff moving by itself. The residents say every night at midnight, they hear someone come in from the front door and see a shadow walking around until it leaves at 3 a.m. If you close any of the bedroom doors while the shadow is there, it gets mad and starts breaking and moving stuff. He brought in a video trying to prove this. I didn't see it. They brought in multiple broken rosaries and wanted our company to pay for them, since it's our ghost that broke them. The unit is finally empty, and I'll be spending some time there this weekend around 12 to 3 a.m. I'll bring a camera to record with, and we'll update this weekend. For the record, I'm kind of a skeptic. I want to believe ghosts are real, but I've never experienced anything paranormal, except for a UFO sighting one time, so it's kind of hard for me to believe anything. But we'll see. Wish me luck. Our tiny haunted apartment. In our little 2-bedroom apartment, in 2007 we had 4 kids and ourselves. It wasn't what you would call spacious or cozy in the least, but we made do with what little we had. When we first moved in, the feel to it was stuffy, not because of the size, but it felt crowded. I felt as though there were people all around me the minute I stepped through the door. One morning, I had started my usual routine, cooking breakfast, cleaning all rooms, etc. Then get the kids ready for the day. I was in the middle of washing dishes, and my 3 boys were down the hallway playing in their room, and my daughter was sitting in the kitchen with me. I hadn't been able to get to the living room just yet when I heard my belt being moved across the carpeted floor. Thinking it was one of my boys, I walked into the living room and could still clearly hear them all still in their room playing. They knew the rules: stay and play in the room until I finished the front part of the apartment. I looked down and the belt had literally been taken off of the door and placed in front of the kitchen walkway. I pick it up and put it back. I go back and finish the dishes when I hear my youngest son in my room talking. I slowly walk up to the door. It cracked open a bit, so I look through. I see my son turn towards the corner sitting Indian style, literally having a conversation with no one. He responds, "No, I can't do that. My mom will get mad." He then shakes his head and looks up. It truly looks like he's in a conversation with something I cannot see. I get a little freaked out, but stay calm and call out his name. He didn't respond in any way. He sat there as though he was listening to this invisible thing, looking up and nodding. So I call out his name once more. This time he shakes his head and turns to me. He says, "Huh, Mama?" I ask him, "Who are you talking to?" He tells me he doesn't know his name, but he told him to go to the bathroom and take the candy out of the cabinet and eat them. I immediately grew scared and angry at the same time, as those were my aspirin for my migraines, and my son was only 3. I asked him if he's seen this thing before, and he told me no. I grabbed him and told him to stay next to me for the remainder of the day. A couple days later, as I was preparing my kids for daycare in the morning, I went to grab my ID in order to cash my paycheck. I always left it on the top shelf in my kitchen, along with my purse, wallet, etc. I reach up and I can't feel it. I climb up on the cabinet and it's not there. My children at the time were all toddlers and couldn't climb up as they were all short. I search around, tear the place apart, but I never found it. We didn't have much in there to begin with, just the essentials. Throughout our entire 6 months there, I couldn't sleep in my room due to the bed always vibrating and hearing whispers from the same corner my son had been talking to that thing in. 2 nights before we moved out, we had all our belongings packed and ready to go. The only thing left were the kids' toys and our blankets. We had just settled down, kids asleep, and my husband and I relaxing watching TV, when we heard one of the kids' toys playing music. I get up and check on this toy. The button was on the off switch, so I think it's a short and take the batteries out. I head back to the living room. The minute I lay my head down, the same toy chimed in along with another toy. Two at this point going off. We both sit up and look at each other. We both agreed this spirit didn't like that we were leaving. I got up, went into the room, and the two toys stopped immediately. I picked them both up and threw them in the dumpster. I lay back down, a bit freaked out. That's when all their toys started up, louder than I've ever heard them. I run into the room, and I literally see all the toys moving around the room as though something was playing with them. I ran down the hall and told my husband to go check it out. He was terrified, but he sucked that up and walked to the room. He stood there in shock. He yelled, "It's time to throw all these out." I yelled back, "It's not the toys, it's the spirit you say doesn't exist." That night was restless, as was the next night. My children, after a couple months into the lease, refused to sleep in their room. They would tell me it felt like someone was pinching them while they laid in bed, and they could hear someone always whispering into their ears, so they would either sleep in the living room or in my bed with us. My apartment was haunted. My apartment was haunted by something that I cannot explain, and living there was the worst 5 months of my life. First, some background information on me, as to establish some basic human credibility before I recount the events that caused me immense anxiety and depression. I am now a 21-year-old male student at Long Beach State, looking to graduate in political science this coming spring. I'm also an alumni member of a fraternity on campus. I don't do drugs, and during the course of these events, I used marijuana once. In mid-January 2011, my best friend Ryan, fraternity pledge brother, and I looked to move out of the fraternity house in hopes of bringing some form of normalcy back to our lives. We found an apartment for rent in our price range, $1,200 for a 2-bedroom in downtown Long Beach, so we followed up and made it happen. The day after we moved in, something strange happened. I went to take my second shower since moving in, and 5 minutes into it, was greeted by my neighbor from downstairs complaining that massive amounts of water were leaking into her unit from ours. I checked the water heater and found water gushing from an emergency release valve on the top, which is never supposed to be opened. A few weeks later, late February, I come home from my crappy job at CSULB bookstore to find my roommate locked out on our second-story balcony. He knocks on the glass door and I let him in. I think it's hilarious and ask him how long he was locked out for. Turns out he was locked out for 6 hours because his right arm was in a splint from soldier surgery. He wasn't able to climb down. He also didn't have a cell phone. He told me that he swore the door was unlocked when he went out for a cigarette. We agreed it was kind of strange, but laughed about him being stuck out there for 6 hours. A few days later, Ryan offers me a bowl to celebrate our new lives away from the frat house. I often don't smoke pot, but I decided it would be fun. I go to bed 45 minutes later, and out of nowhere, I am the most terrified I've ever been in my life. I felt a strange sensation, and I had the overwhelming feeling that there was some manifestation of negative energy in my room. I was hearing thoughts that were not mine, and they were not pleasant. My closed door was bouncing back and forth, so I closed my windows. It continued. I frantically grabbed my phone from the windowsill to text Ryan in the next room. My phone shows one new text, so I click the message box, but there is no new text message. Convenient time for an iPhone glitch, right? Ryan tells me that I need to calm down and go to bed. The next morning I wake up and convince myself that it was all the result of smoking that bowl and go about as usual. A few weeks went by before one day when I'm at work and get a text from Ryan saying that he's locked out again. So I leave work early to get home and let him in. When I got home and let him in, he was a little freaked out. He told me that this time he left the door cracked open a few inches and that it slammed shut on its own and latched right after. We were both pretty disturbed, but for the next few weeks, we went about our lives. On March 15, 2011, I went home after my classes and discovered Ryan's room completely torn apart. It looked like the place had been ransacked. There were clothes everywhere, items knocked over. His heavy wooden desk had been completely knocked over, and the pencil tray had been pulled all the way out and dumped. It looked like a fucking tornado came through. I look through the glass door and see Ryan locked out on the balcony, and he starts banging on the glass. "Chris, let me in, man. Hurry up and let me the fuck in." I open the door for him, and the first thing he says to me is, "Bro, all the shit happened while I was out there. I fucking watched as my room was completely torn apart by some invisible force for half an hour." He swears that he went out for a smoke, and at this time he left the door halfway open. He hears the door begin sliding shut on its own, so he grabs it as quick as he can and catches it before it closes, but the force of the door was too strong and actually pulled him with it. Ryan swears that as he smoked his way through a full pack of cigarettes, he watched as his room was ransacked by some invisible force. I was freaked the fuck out and wanted nothing more than to get the fuck out of there and never go back. I told Ryan that I thought we should both get out of the apartment for a while, but he just wanted to clean his room and ignore it. I couch surfed for about a week before regaining the courage to go back and face this thing. The weeks and months that followed were among the worst of my life. Any peace of mind that I had in my own bedroom was lost. When I wanted to fall asleep, strange things would start happening. My closed door would start shaking back and forth, and occasionally I would hear a violent bang on the door. It got to the point where I would put my shoes up against the door to stop it from banging back and forth. Then one morning, I woke up and found that one of those shoes had been moved to the other side of the room. Ryan would go home to San Diego on the weekends, which meant I was often there alone. I would often hear footsteps on my carpet next to me as I tried to fall asleep, and I would sense overwhelming negative energy. In short, when it was around our apartment, I could feel it. I would get goosebumps out of nowhere, and I could just sense it. It was a very strange sensation, and I'm afraid I cannot quite effectively describe it to you. My sleeping habits deteriorated, and my grades began to drop like stones. We didn't know how to deal with it, so we started to ignore it, but I can tell you that it was a very difficult thing to do. I found that it was nearly impossible for me to fall asleep before 2 a.m., no matter how hard I tried. Something would always keep me up. The growling sounds was the worst. It was low-pitched and extremely creepy. For a while, I thought it was an airplane, but after going outside and not being able to hear the sound, I concluded that the source was indeed inside the apartment. I'm having trouble piecing the rest of the events in order, so I'll just have to list some creepy shit that happened. During the day in mid-April, Ryan's girlfriend, Taylor, came over. We were trying to put a movie in the Xbox when the power went out. To our surprise, the power outage was restricted to our 2 bedrooms and not the rest of the apartment. Strange. We decided to play Uno on the carpet in the main room. While playing, all 3 of us heard the sound of something sliding across our tile countertop in the kitchen. I go to investigate and find that it was their bottle of Andre Champagne. A few weeks go by. Days before we broke our lease and moved out, back and forth and making strange shapes like it was alive. A few weeks ago, days before we broke our lease and moved out, I was home alone again and in my room on Reddit. I look across the room at my MacBook charger and notice that it was moving on its own, back and forth, and making strange shapes like it was alive. I left the room and went into the kitchen. I opened the cupboard and discovered that my unopened box of Honey Bunches of Oats had been torn open and the bag had been pulled out at a very strange angle. Decided to leave and spend the night at the fraternity house. I have many more accounts of strange events that occurred while living there, and I may post some of them here in the comments section.